Welcome back, CSC 121, to part 2 of our dice game. And what we're going to do now with our dice game, other than just find out who wins when you roll the dice, is keep track of wins and then have a best of 3 between you or me and the computer. What I'm going to do first, because we're going to be modifying code, is we're going to fork our file. Because we have a file here, and I'm going to go down here to this little arrow, and there's a fork button, and that'll basically make a copy of it. So if you just hit fork, it'll actually put a -1 after it. Now you could leave the -1, you could go in here and put like a B or something like that, or put a 2 so you know it's the second file. That might be better. Or you could put loop or something, but we're going to put this just so it's different than the first one, just so you have a copy of it. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to hit enter. So I'll leave it like that with the 2. So when I go into my repels, I'll see the dice game, and then I'll have a dice game with a 2, and I'll know this is the one with the while loop. I won't know it's the one with the while loop, but this will be the one with the while loop. Now, what we're going to do here, just to review it one more time, is all we're doing is generating 4 random numbers. Roll 1, row 2, computer roll 1, computer roll 2, 4 random numbers, and then adding up the 2 for yourself, adding up the 2 for the computer, and seeing who wins. And if they're the same, it's a tie. That's what's happening here. There's a tie. So there's 3 scenarios. You win, the computer wins, or it's a tie. In this scenario, it's a tie because they add up. And the only reason we're showing the 2 separate numbers is because it's a little more interesting, because you're rolling dice, and that's the way dice show up, because they have either a 1 through 6 on them. So we're trying to do it like dice, even though we're just looking at a console here. So that's the scenario here. Now what we want to do is add up points. Now we're going to put this into a while loop, because what we're going to do is we're going to keep running this out. Now we're not going to initiate it. The computer's just going to run it through as many times as it needs. We're not initiating with any kind of button or anything like that. Eventually we'll try to do something like that, maybe with an input command or something that we can make it happen. But for now, we're just going to have the computer do it. But when we put it into a while loop, we're basically going to have the while loop run infinitely until we break it. And we know when we're going to break it. We're going to break it when someone gets 2 points. When someone wins twice, then we'll break it. And we've done some exercises where we've broken things or used the break statement when we get to a certain point or get to a certain number. And we did that with the password, where we break it after someone puts the wrong password in 3 times. Now, what I'd like to do here, even though you might say, well, why are you doing this now? It does get a little complicated. Even though it's kind of a simple idea of what we're working with here, what I'd like to do is actually just kind of work with the points first and make sure we're applying points, because we basically have 3 print statements, which are just showing the totals and saying who won, lost, or tied. And what I'd like to do before we worry about the while loop, because that presents its own set of issues, is just make sure the points work. So I'm going to create something called y wins, and that means your wins, and I'll set it to 0. So it'll initially be assigned to 0, and then it'll increment from there. And then I'm going to make one called C wins, and that'll be for the computer. So we're just keeping track of your wins and the computer wins, because those are the only points we're working with. So we'll set them both at 0. Now we're not putting anything in a loop yet, but what I want to do is just figure out where we're applying the points. Now, this is probably where we're applying the points, because this is where we're determining who won. Now, if your total is greater than the computer total, you win, I should get a point. And y wins should get a point. So we're going to go in here and just do y wins and then increment using the shortcut plus equals 1. And then we'll do the same thing down here with the computer. We won't do anything. Nobody will get any points for a tie. But down here, we're going to say C wins plus equals 1. And that way the computer will get a point when the computer wins. And what I'll do here is down at the bottom after message. Now message is this message that says who won or who lost or whatever. I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to print. And you could put these together or put separate statements. Maybe I'll put them together. And I'll just put y wins, comma, C wins. So we know that it'll be your wins and the computer wins. Since we go first, that's the one that goes first. So we'll put y wins and C wins. So we're just going to print that out at the end, so we know what happened. So we know kind of what the score and who gets the point. So I know if I win, I should get, it should say 1-0 if I win. If computer wins, it should say 0-1. And if nobody wins, it should still say 0-0. So let's see what happens. And this is without putting anything in a loop yet. And this says, I rolled a 7, the computer rolled a 12. Whoa, double 6s. And computer wins. And 0-1. And that's the way it should be. Let's try it again. I won, it's 1-0. I1 again, it's 1-0. Let's see if we get a tie. I1, computer wins, it's a tie, 0-0. So that's working. So it's applying the points correctly. We want to make sure that's correct first before we worry about the if and else and how we're going to stop it. Now, this is a little tricky how we're going to stop it, because actually the sample that I showed you earlier is actually wrong. I messed it up. It seemed to work some of the time, but it didn't work all the time. So I went back and looked at it again, and it kind of makes sense because we're printing out these statements here, and everything's going to be part of the loop. And if we break the loop at any time, it's not going to show this last statement. And that's going to be a problem. We want to make sure we see one more statement before the loop is over. That's why we want to break it after this, so we still know who won the last game before we say who won 2 out of 3. So what we can do here is at the very end, I think at the very end after everything, we're going to put something that actually breaks the loop. Now, we don't have a loop yet, so let's put this in a loop. Let's get everything in a loop, except for this. We're not going to put this in a loop, because if we did, it would restart at 0 every time the loop went. So whenever you have a counter, you're typically not going to put it in a loop because it'll reset. So you're kind of keeping that out of the loop, so it starts at 0 and you're counting it inside the loop, if that makes sense. So you don't want to be resetting it. A loop will reset a counter. We're not going to have that in a loop. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight everything but those two and the import all the way down, and I'll highlight all this stuff, and I'm just going to hit my tab key. And it should bump everything in. Now I'm going to get a wavy line there because it doesn't like being indented. And what I'll do is after this, I'll just go after here and I'll hit enter and I'll put while true with a capital T and a colon. And that means everything here is in the while loop. Everything will just run forever right now. It'll print out these statements down here, but it'll run forever. So what we have to do is find a way to stop it. So initially, I was putting an if statement after this. I was putting an if statement inside one of these things and nesting it. But actually, the best thing to do is run an if statement after everything's done. Because after this runs through one cycle, because really, this is one cycle here. That's one cycle. So after this is done, and after it prints out what the score is, we actually then want to determine, does anybody have 2 points yet? So that's what we're going to do at the end here. We're going to go at the very end, inside the loop, because we're still indented here. We're still inside our while loop. We're still indented here. We're going to say if, and we're going to say y wins. We'll do the y wins first. It doesn't matter which one you do. We're going to say if y wins equals 2. So that means if somebody got to 2, and if in this case y wins is at 2, we're going to put an if condition, and then what's going to happen? Well, we're going to print out something, and I'm just going to put a straight string to print out. I'm just going to print out you win, I'll put in caps, you win 2 out of 3. And I'll put an exclamation mark because that's us, because we're winning here. That's you, not the computer. And then you could either put another if or you can put an elif. Let's try an elif. See what happens with an elif. Elif C wins equals 2. So now it'll check both of them. It'll still go through both of them. So it shouldn't matter if they're both ifs or if this is an elif. And what's going to happen then if they get to 2? And I'll just copy this and back up here, and I'll paste this. I have a little extra spacer. Be careful with some of these things not to have extra spaces in here. It doesn't like when you mess up the tabs. And someone's going to have a message where you're going to get something about tabs. You're going to get an error about tabs. Sooner or later it's going to happen. It happens in Repl.it. It didn't happen in Python anywhere, but it seems to happen in Repl.it. So we're going to say computer wins 2 out of 3. And they won't get in all caps because we're not as happy about the computer winning. And they don't get an exclamation point, so they'll just get a period. So after one cycle, it'll come down here and check, and we could even put a message here, and we could say, check for 2 wins. That's all we're doing here at the end. We're checking for 2 wins. So after it runs through one cycle, and points are applied, because we applied points here and we applied points here, if possible, then we're going to check. So we're checking at the end, and then if nobody has 2 yet, it's going to run through the loop again. And then once it gets through where somebody gets 2 points, it'll check here and it'll say you win 2 out of 3, and it should stop it. Now we could still print out this thing if we want, because remember, if we break it higher up, it's not going to put any totals down here. It's not going to do any of this. So what's going to happen is just going to have the last score that it was at before it ended. Now let's try this out and see what happens. So again, everything's in a while loop. The only things not inside the while loop are initial variables starting at 0. And again, we don't want them in the while loop because they'll reset each time. They'll go back to 0 each time. So they'll never, you know, if we go through the second time, they'll be back at 0. You'll be resetting it. So you don't want to reset. So that's why we're setting these wins at 0 up here. So let's try this out. Whoa, and what we have here is an infinite loop. Because what did I forget? This isn't good. Stop. There we go. We have a stop button up there. Luckily, we stopped. So see what happens here. Look at those wins. 5. Look at how quick it went up. Now, what we forgot here was our break. Because not only are we going to print that out that you won 2 out of 3, but then we got to break it. We got to break out of the loop. Actually, I didn't mean for that to happen, but I'm glad that happened because now you saw what happens. Because we didn't do anything to break out of the infinite loop. Now we're going to break out of that loop both times. Now, if nobody has 2, then we're going to keep going. But now we're going to break it once somebody gets to 2, because obviously we were at 5,017 here and 5,146. Who was winning here? I guess the computer was way ahead here. So now one other thing I'll do now that I'm looking at these, this first one here where it says you rolled, we could go in here right after the quote and put a backspace N and put a line break so that we get a little break there. So each time that happens, and we could even do it in front of these because then these might be separate. So I might do it here too. We'll just see if that helps. So that means the final statement here should be separated a little bit. So I'm just putting that, remember we're putting it in the string because that break character is part of the string, that new line character, it's part of a string. So we're putting that in there. Now let's see what happens now, and hopefully we won't have this again. And 3 times, that looks good. So the first time we won, it says you win, and we're up 1-0. Then the second time the computer wins, it's tied 1-1. And then the second time we won 8-5, 2-1, and then you win 2 out of 3. So that's actually the way it should work. We could try it one more time just to make sure. And the spaces look good. So I put a line break in front of these 2 statements here. Now again, we couldn't put message, we couldn't make a new message because the message is up here and we're kind of breaking it before it shows a new message. So we would have to put another, I guess another print message here if we wanted to do that again, but we're just printing out our statement. That's fine what we're doing down here. But this works perfect, and let's look at this one. We won 4-2. It's a tie. It's still 1-0, so the score, this is the score. It stays the same. And now here, it's a second tie. The score stays the same. And then I won. So the computer didn't win any of those. We won 2 and we tied 2. But we're up 2-0, so we win 2 out of 3. And I'll try one more here. And that looks good. You win, computer wins, you win. So we're winning here. The computer's not winning, and it's working. So we have 3 printouts. Well, it won't always be 3 printouts. I guess if we won 2-0 right in a row, there would only be 2 printouts. And this is the final statement here of what's happening, and we have little breaks in between. So that's working okay. And like I said, it can get complex, but when I was doing it, I was having some issues, and I was like, wait a minute, this has to be at the end. You have to check to make sure what the points are at the very end after everything happens, because everything else is part of our regular cycle that we're going through. So we're just kind of checking at the end after everything's done, saying, okay, does anybody have 2 points? If you do, let's stop. That's kind of what we're doing. Does anybody have 2 points? Let's stop. That's kind of what this is doing here. So hopefully that makes some sense, and hopefully that wasn't too complex. I don't think it is. If any issue you might have it with tabs or indents or something like that. But by highlighting all that code and just hitting the tab key and then putting this in here, and it moved everything over. So everything else that was tabbed was moved over. So that looks okay. And now when you're done, what you're going to do is you can just go here to share. Now you don't have to hit save or anything. Now if it's working, just hit share and skip over this stuff. Skip over all this stuff here. Don't even do this. Invite someone to join with a link. Skip that too. Just go here to copy Repl.it link and then go back to My Warren. And then you're going to go to coursework and you're going to go down to Unit 8. I put this in Unit 8. And you're going to click on Dice Game and you're just going to add a comment. Now don't paste anything in here yet. Make sure that you click on this Insert Link because this is going to be a link. And make sure you do this. Make sure you paste the link here and it's going to have your username in there. And then make sure you change this to New Window so that when I click on it, it opens a tab in a new window. So just paste your link that you copied. And remember, you can just copy this. You can actually just copy that if you want to. You don't have to do the share thing, the copy Repl link down here. You don't have to do that. If you just copy that, that's the same thing. Like I said, just skip this part here. Just only do this part here, copy the Repl link. So again, I'll copy this again, even if I messed it up, and I'll go here. And if I just go here and I'll paste it, and you can see it's the same thing here. It's my second file. So that, it's not a real long URL, so it makes some sense. So you'll know if it's wrong. Make sure it says new window, hit OK, hit save. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to send me your first one, because if I want to look at your first one, I can. Because whenever I see that now, I can just cut off your URL and look at all your files if I want to. It's just if I want to hold on to them, I have to fork them in. So that's all you have to do for Dice Game. So it's kind of 2 files in the one. We're going to do the first one where we just kind of output the dice, and then for the second one, we're going to put everything in a while loop and then just throw this little if condition at the end. An if, elif, even if you did 2 ifs, it would still be fine. And these are going to break out of our while loop. We're also going to assign counters here that start at 0, and they increment where you get a point if you win, and C wins gets a point if they win. And hopefully that works out okay. And we're going to do a little more with that. We'll probably do even a rock, paper, scissors games, which will be a little bit more involved, but hopefully this will be a little practice for that. So that was Dice Game.